The House will come to order. Members will be in their seats. The clerk has opened the roll. You may record your presence. Please rise and give your attention to House Chaplain, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Representative Waymaster.
Would you join with me in a moment of silence, recognizing family and friends who have lost family and friends last night in a tragic accident in Washington, D.C. Let us take a moment and recognize them in silence. Father, our hearts are sad today as we pray for individuals and families who are grieving the loss of a friend or a loved one who perished last night, Flight 5342. I pray your grace and comfort upon all who are suffering losses, to make the great divide real. Walk beside each one, Father, and pour your strength into every minute of their day. There are times when words cannot adequately convey our feelings. Today is one of those days. When our wisdom and words fail and we do not know what to say or even how to pray, we humbly turn to you. Indeed, it is at times like this when your word is what we want to hear. Jesus, you said our Father knows what we need before we even ask him. So because we do not know what to ask or say and we do not know how to pray, we turn to you and the prayer you taught us to pray and invite you to join with me if you'd like. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread and forgive us our debts as we also forgive our debtors. And do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen.
The Republic stands, a nation indivisible, liberty and justice. Has every member had an opportunity to record their presence? The clerk will close the roll and record the attendance. Introduction of bills and concurrent resolutions. The clerk will read.
HB 2159 by Representatives Proctor and Hoheisel, an act concerning law enforcement. HB 2160 by Committee on Local Government, requested by Representative Barth, an act concerning municipalities.
Messages from the Senate. The clerk will read.
Announcing passage of Senate Bill 10, Senate Bill 35. Senate Bill number 10 by Senators Tyson and Nally and others, an act concerning property taxation. Senate Bill number 35 by Committee on Assessment and Taxation, an act concerning property taxation.
House Bill 2037 appears on the consent calendar for the first day. Is there any objection? Seeing none, it will remain on the consent calendar for the second day. House Bill 2004 appears on the consent calendar for the second day. Is there any objection? Seeing none, it will remain on the consent calendar for the third day. Speaker recognizes the Majority Leader for a motion to resolve into the Committee of the Whole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the House resolve itself from the Committee of the Whole for the purpose of considering those items under the heading of General Orders.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Motion carries. Speaker appoints Representative Proctor to chair the Committee of the Whole.
Morning, body. The first order of business is Senate Bill 63. For the purposes of carrying Senate Bill 63, the chair recognizes Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were amendments in committee. I move the committee report.
You've heard the motion. All in favor of signify by saying aye. All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes and the committee report is adopted. You may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senate Bill 63 is from the Health and Human Services Committee. It is also called the Help Not Harm Act. The act prohibits gender transitioning of children 17 years and under. It specifically prohibits puberty blocker drugs, opposite sex hormones, and gender transitioning surgeries on minors. The bill has a civil cause of action for healthcare professionals who provide gender transitioning for any child 17 and younger, with a statute of limitations of 10 years from the time of treatment. In addition, the child may file an action up to 10 years after they turn age 18. In addition, the provider shall be subject to discipline by their appropriate licensing authority, and malpractice liability coverage will no longer be available for gender transitioning of minors. There is no appreciable fiscal impact. Over time, we have seen more and more children diagnosed with gender dysphoria. It was initially assumed by some that puberty blocking drugs, opposite sex hormones, and surgeries would be helpful for children suffering from these conditions. So the use of these treatments has increased exponentially over the past several years. This seems to have started from the sincere belief that these treatments would prevent the children from committing suicide. And so it was based on the desire to save the lives of children. I don't know of anyone here on either side of the aisle who, if faced between the choice of doing these procedures versus the child dying, would not choose to save the life of the child. In fact, many of us here would be willing to give up our own lives to save the life of a child. We would save the life of a child at almost any cost. So the question is not whether members of this body are motivated to help children. There is no doubt we are. We all are. The real question is whether or not these treatments actually do what they claim and if they do it safely. Over time, the effectiveness of these treatments has been disproved, especially over the last 12 months. When a similar bill was heard last spring, there's been more data available since. The rates of suicide do not decrease with these treatments. There is no validity in the notion that prohibiting these unproven treatments results in children dying. Puberty blockers do not help. Opposite sex hormones do not help. And most definitely, gender surgeries do not help. On top of that, multiple studies show that about 85% of these children, 85 to 87% suffering from gender dysphoria, will change their minds and become comfortable with their body of birth if given time by age 18. If these treatments do not work and there are severe side effects, then what does work? The answer is very simple and it's logical. We provide counseling. We treat underlying psychiatric illnesses, and we give the children some time. And about 85% of them will be comfortable with their bodies of their birth by age 18. There is no good reason to continue transgender treatments on children because of the severe and often lifelong side effects, such as sterility, such as inability to have sexual pleasure, such as many other things. That's why these treatments are not approved by the FDA, as a matter of fact. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Does any member wish to speak to the bill? The chair recognizes Representative Steens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am speaking today in favor of SB 63. We've heard testimony from both the proponents and opponents on this issue, and I appreciate all those who testified in committee on the Help Not Harm Act that is being proposed today. I would like to take a minute and recognize that issues that involve children are often infused with lots of emotion. This is natural. As a mother myself of 5 children, I understand at the end of the day, we all want what's best for our child. Many times there are decisions that can be very difficult, but have to be made. I would like to recognize that for the most part, as parents, I think we can all agree, we all want our children to have safe schools and communities, shelter and security, and at the end of the day, we all love our children and do not want them to feel left out. However, I do have concerns when it comes to gender-affirming medications like puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. I understand there is a social transitioning, which is one of the first steps in gender-affirming care, but today I'm going to speak to medications and the safety concerns, not to mention some of the side effects. Originally, puberty blockers were developed to treat a rare medical condition known as precocious puberty, where young children at the age of 6 or 7 were developing breasts or pubic hair secondary to a hormone known as GnRH. And this sends signals earlier than it should. Let it be known that this bill is not preventing the treatment for this condition being done. Unfortunately, though, instead, they are using these puberty blockers for what they were intended for, to stop premature puberty. Doctors have used them to prevent children who have gender dysphoria from going through puberty at a normal age, instead preventing an abnormal condition to facilitate normal development. So these doctors and gender clinics are creating an abnormal condition in order to prevent normal development. However, these drugs do have serious side effects. Documented side effects can include increased BMI, decreased lean body mass, arterial hypertension, infertility, and sterility, just to name a few. Doctors hope that these will ease the mental health of these children and/or the condition of gender dysphoria. But as more studies have been done, gender dysphoria did not resolve as a result of puberty suppression. We know children and adolescents lack the emotional and cognitive maturity to consent to treatment that may have lifelong consequences. Many proponents claim that these puberty blockers are reversible, but this is in treating precocious puberty, not gender dysphoria. In a letter to a British medical journal, 3 experts noted it is surely presumptuous to extrapolate observations from an intervention that suppresses pathological premature puberty to be one that suppresses normal puberty. The article went on to say puberty blockers leave a young person in developmental limbo without the benefit of pubertal hormones or secondary characteristics, which would tend to consolidate gender identity. Then there are the cross-sex hormones, for example, where biological females who wish to present as males are given the male hormone testosterone to give them more masculine characteristics like facial and body hair, or males who want to present as females, the female hormone estrogen. to give them more feminine characteristics, such as enlarged breasts. These also have increased risk of serious physical health conditions. For biological males taking estrogen, there are increased risks for blood clots, high triglycerides, cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, and diabetes. In biological females taking masculinizing hormones, testosterone, they are at increased risk for high red blood cells, high cholesterol, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and destabilization of certain psychiatric disorders. Gender reassignment surgery, which of course is the most invasive in this transitioning procedure, have resulted in healthy females having healthy breasts removed and other body parts altered, only for these patients to regret it later. And we know this is irreversible. Mental health care professionals understand these kids need help with their gender dysphoria and that their mental health needs need to be addressed. We have heard how some of these gender-affirming physicians have unfortunately often made the parents feel that if you did not perform these gender reassignment surgeries, they were told, would you rather have a live son or a dead daughter? One other important fact to note that we heard testimony on is that there does exist a social contagion to children questioning their gender that should not be overlooked. Social media has exploded over the last 15 years, and while statistics are hard to track between 2009 and 2019, in the United Kingdom, children began referred for transitioning treatment increased by 1,000% for those assigned as male at birth and 4,400% for those assigned female. Meanwhile, according to the University of California Williams Institute and the CDC, the number of young people identifying as transgender in the U.S. has doubled since 2017 to approximately 300,000. Many teens reported being home during COVID and watching influencers on TikTok saying how transitioning and changing their sex had made them much more happy. According to a Pew Research, TikTok has a massive influence, and up to 67% of teens between the ages of 13 and 17 found that the digital space contains an over-exaggeration content that shapes a teenager's value in a very misleading way. In closing, I would like to say the implementation of invasive physiological gender transition procedures such as puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and/or gender reassignment surgery upon minors raises grave concerns. The interference with natural biological functions, the serious potential side effects, and the often irreversible nature of the physical changes made mean that a high bar would have to be reached to justify them. And as parents, I would argue this is not a risk or a decision that we should take or therefore make for a minor child that will affect them for a lifetime. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Chair recognizes Representative Susan Ruiz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't understand why this bill is the first bill this legislature is going to listen to and work. It's the very first bill of the session. You know, we were all just elected, and I would say we all heard just about the same things from every one of our constituents, and that was that they are hurting. They're hurting because of the cost of living in our state. They're hurting because of the cost of childcare in our state. They're hurting because of the cost of health care in our state, not to mention the cost of medication. They're hurting because of the cost of housing and rent, being able to buy a first home. It's almost impossible. People are hurting because of property taxes that we made a promise to lower in some kind of way. Yet this is the first bill the legislature chose to hear and debate. This is just unbelievable. And I don't even know how to defend the legislature for their choice, and I won't. This is the Help Not Harm Act. Well, let me tell you, this bill will inflict harm on children under the age of 18 and physicians, other healthcare professionals, mental health professionals, school personnel, state employees, and even state legislators, because we are technically state employees and we are mentioned in the bill. It's easy to see that children and parents and physicians, pediatricians, endocrinologists are all at the center of the bill. And this bill will cause medication, pediatricians, prescribers of medication, those who perform surgeries to be held liable for malpractice, and even prevent them from utilizing state malpractice insurance, which they pay into. So in effect, the legislature is interfering into the scope of practice of physicians, and especially pediatricians and endocrinologists. It's even more cruel than that. Other professionals, like mental health professionals, school employees, etc., will be prohibited from providing interventions. I'm not talking about treatment, but interventions other than medical or surgical interventions, such as therapy or simply acknowledging a child's preferred pronoun. Oh, also, they would be prohibited from making referrals to health and mental health professionals. I've received many calls, and even over the summer, social workers asked me to go on a Zoom meeting because they anticipated this bill would be brought through again, although they've nowhere to understand that this bill was being brought as the first bill. They thought maybe later in the legislature. They don't understand how they are going to be able to approach a child that they know has gender dysphoria, is identifying as trans. They have no clue, because they're under that liability umbrella where they could be held liable. However, if a child does not identify as trans or doesn't have a gender dysphoria diagnosis, they and their parents and physicians are in the clear. Their practice can continue. So all of the descriptions that the representative before me made that is of concern for trans kids, children that have been diagnosed with gender dysphoria, doesn't seem to have the same concern for kids who don't, because they will continue to be able to receive the same medications. And there's people who keep saying, well, I'm concerned about the long-term effects. Okay, then let's ban these medications for every child. But that's not the intent of this bill. The clear intent of this bill is to go after trans children, children with gender dysphoria, and the physicians and the parents, their physicians and parents. There are studies cited in our committee from conferees who talked about how other countries have banned this, the treatment, especially the surgeries, of course, and the use of medications. And what I find it interesting is that, you know, we don't, this body doesn't seem to, well, this body accepted that, and especially in committee, everyone started quoting all that and say, well, they're not doing that in other countries, they're banning it, so why should we? Well, when we use the excuse of how other countries have universal health care, all of a sudden we have deaf ears. When we talk about other countries having sensible gun control, again, deaf ears. Oh, we don't want to hear that. We're picking and choosing, and I will let you know that those countries who have banned some of this treatment and going after the same trans kids that this country is doing, that this state is doing, that this legislature is doing, because those legislators have become very conservative, just like this one. It also seemed very clear to me from the conferees in the committee that surgeries was of great concern. Surgeries first, the medication piece was second. They emphasized and focused a lot on surgeries. They even brought in, I don't know who paid them, but somebody pays for folks to come in from out of state and come in and tell us the most horrific stories you can possibly hear, the most horrific words you can possibly hear that will leave a lasting impression, and it seems to have done just that. It's a way to manipulate. Am I saying that that didn't happen to those individuals? It probably did. But now to gain financial, being able to live off of that by going from state to state and give the same story. They were at the Senate in the morning, and then they were in Health and Human Services in the afternoon. They do this almost in every state. They get paid to do this. Seems to work. That a lot of people are falling for it. And yet, even the committee forgot the young people that came to the committee who were opposed to the bill and who have been prescribed the medications, the puberty blockers. And as they got older, past age 18, some of them have also received surgery. And they were very open to the committee about their story. Not once did they say they were sad or they were sorry that they ever did that. Most of these young people are young professionals. They're lawyers now. They're practicing lawyers. They're doing so well for themselves. A couple of them are teachers. One in particular is getting his PhD. The one thing we did hear from them is that they are born and raised Kansans and they want to stay in Kansas. They do not want to leave our state, as so many other young people do. But these are exactly the people that we're trying to kick out, push away out of the state by trying to pass this kind of a bill that is detrimental to our young people. We have young people up in the gallery. What kind of message are we sending to them? That this legislature felt that this is the first bill that we must work on the floor and vote on. It's unbelievable. I oppose Senate Bill 63. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there further discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, it's interesting that we wind up here with this on the table so soon. Yesterday, we got a notice that we should come back at 5 o'clock when all of us would otherwise be somewhere else, simply because we had to officially have a reading in of this bill so that we could be here today. I don't know how many people, even in this body, have actually read that bill, but man, that bill's got a lot of stuff in it. There's a whole lot of stuff in there that um, is expected for the members of the body to be capable of absorbing somewhere between a dinner and a breakfast so that we can show up today and make good cognitive decisions about what is in fact the lives of children. And children, I've heard that we're protecting children, we're protecting children, we're protecting children, and I believe wholeheartedly that's what we should be doing. I stand on the front lines to protect all children. You know, I can remember when my own daughter was about 15 years old. She might have been 14. But it was near Christmas, and she'd gone to school, and all the school kids told her that Santa Claus was fake. It wasn't real. And I believe in making an effort to let a child hold on to that childhood as long as they possibly can. Because once you cross that threshold, it's a wrap. You're never going back. So I told her, I said, well, you can look around and look at all the things you've got, and you can go look at what they have. And if you're willing to trade your Santa Claus and what he does for you with what they have, then you don't believe in Santa. Because I was asking her she had a list that she wanted me to give to Santa Claus. Well, the next day she handed me her little letter to go to Santa, and of course I opened it because I wanted to know what she had to say. And at the bottom, she said that she was sorry about what she said about you not being real to the other kids, but she just didn't want to be made fun of, but she really believes in you. And that's what goes through the mind of a child. And we keep talking about children, children, children. I can't even say that, some things in the proposed bill, that I don't agree with. But, my God, if you read that bill, they want to lock up the receptionist that answered the phone when you called to make certain that you could even get some kind of services. The bill just, it's so far reaching that anybody's in danger. And I just think, I think that's wrong. I think that some of that is an indication, at least to me, because we all have opinions, and I've certainly formed mine. And it's my opinion that we've got some people that just want to go overboard and make it exceptionally difficult, if not damning, to those who have other choices for their lives. But the question again is children, right? Like, what defines a child? And in many ways, we've already done this. We've answered this question. It's been answered. And it's been answered in our judicial system. But from the party of law and order, I would think that we would want some consistency in that. So with that, I have an amendment.
The amendment appears short. The clerk will read.
On page 1 in line 19 by striking 18 and inserting 14.
Representative, would you like to explain your amendment?
I would. I heard one of my colleagues say earlier from this podium that this is not a chance we should take that might affect the life of a child forever. And I agree, but again, I'm back on what is a child, and we have child listed as 18 in this particular bill. However, we've made the decision that a child of 14 that we want to protect, and I read again, not a chance we should take that might affect a child for a lifetime. Those are the words. But at 14 years old, we can lock that child away for a lifetime. I'm not asking you to vote for anything that we haven't already agreed to, because we've already agreed to that when it comes to our judicial system and those professionals that we say can ascertain from a conversation with a child that this child is capable of making adult decisions. If we can do that at 14, then in all consistency and fairness, this should read 14 as well. And with that, I move my amendment.
Does anyone wish to speak to the amendment? The chair recognizes Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative. It's my opinion that this amendment is not appropriate for this bill, and it would be I would urge you to vote no. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Chair recognizes Representative Sawyer Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry about that. Body, I would actually urge you to support this. We often have discussions here in the legislature about what is or is not an adult. So if we think about what the age of majority is, most of the time it is 18. But we do have some exceptions where we allow, in particular, marriage for children under 18, that is entering into an often damaging, sometimes lifelong contract that they really do not have the ability to discern, yet we seem to have a bit of a double standard here. If we do think that children should be getting married, which we do determine that by our laws currently, and if we determine that children should be giving birth, then those people of that age should also be allowed to make these decisions with their parents in regards to their care. This amendment simply offers a legal consistency. And I guess if you want to vote no, I guess that means that you're into kids getting married. So this is an opportunity for you to signal your virtues to your constituents, letting them know what you think is and is not appropriate. So I would urge your support. Thank you.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, Representative Carr, you may close on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, there are so many things, issues that I would have with this bill, and I'm not even going to say that I would personally agree with any age. However, we have already made that decision that 14 is old enough to make life decisions. 14 is old enough to go to jail. And if that be the case, then 14 should be old enough to make these decisions. And if, in fact, you don't feel as though 14 is the right age, then I would certainly urge this body that we go into statute and we change that and we use the 18 as well when it comes to judicial matters and everything else. We have to have consistency, or it looks as though it looks in this case that we're just picking on those individuals who are underserved and live an alternative lifestyle that, even I don't understand, but I don't claim to. I just want to be fair. And with that, I close.
You've heard the motion by Representative Carr to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay.
Division.
Nays appear to have it. Division has been called. Clerk will open the roll and you may vote. Seeing 15 hands, roll call is in order. Has every member had the opportunity to vote? The clerk will close the roll and take the tally. I'm sorry. Does any member wish to change their vote? The gallery will not take photos of the boards. It's a violation of the rules, and you will be removed if you continue. The members will maintain decorum in the chamber. 31 having voted in favor and 85 against, the motion fails. We're back on the bill. Does anyone wish to speak to the bill? The chair recognizes Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, body. First, I want to speak to the process that this bill went through. This is a bill, Senate bill that has never been heard in a committee on our side of the chamber. We had a twin bill, but the Senate bill was amended on the Senate floor and has since been rushed through, as the former representative mentioned, was read in last night so that it could be worked in and voted on this week. And there's no reason for that other than to attempt to stifle our resistance. So I want to encourage you all to buckle up, because we're not going down without a fight, and this is not going to stop our resistance in the attempt to take away the rights of Kansans. I also want to call out the hypocrisy of the majority party in this, of saying that they want to focus on issues specific to Kansans, when this has absolutely nothing to do with what Kansans are asking for. In fact, bills like this are part of a larger culture war that are being waged against transgender people, one of the most vulnerable populations in our country, a population that we are called on to fight for and to protect. And I encourage you to think about what they experience every day, waking up to the news that bills like this are being debated by the state to take away their access to evidence-based care. Waking up to see executive orders that prevent them from serving authentically in the military, or executive orders that prevent them from having their gender identity authentically represented on their government forms of identification. Waking up to find that their rights are slowly being chipped away by our government. This bill does nothing to protect trans kids, as the proponents may claim. What this bill does is represent an outrageous overreach of government power. This bill limits free speech by preventing state employees from using a child's correct pronouns. This bill violates the right to free expression of dress for trans youth. This bill infringes on the rights of medical providers to offer peer-reviewed, evidence-based care supported by every single major medical association in the United States, and threatens those providers with strict liability lawsuits and revocation of their licensure. This bill laughs in the face of parental rights, rights that many in this chamber claim to care about. It eliminates parents' rights to make private healthcare decisions in consultation with their children and their children's doctors. But most prominently, this bill violates the fundamental, constitutional, human rights of transgender Kansans to not be discriminated against. Despite the fact that gender-affirming care is overwhelmingly used by cisgender children in comparison to trans kids for things like precocious puberty and gynecomastia, not even to mention elective surgeries for things like nose jobs or hormones for boys who hormones to make boys taller, for example. This bill doesn't apply to any of them. It only applies to transgender Kansans, which is explicit discrimination. It also flies in the face of the Kansas Constitution, which guarantees Kansans the right to control one's own body, to assert bodily integrity, and to exercise self-determination. Just like everyone else in this room, transgender Kansans just want to live authentically, to access evidence-based healthcare, to contribute to our society, to be treated equally, and to call Kansas home. But bills like this make that impossible. Reducing access to care and passing bills like this that are targeted at LGBTQ Kansans are proven to negatively impact the mental health of trans people and to increase suicide rates among LGBTQ Kansans. Trans kids will die without access to this care, and that should weigh on every single person in this room. It will also drive away the loving families who want the best care for their children from the state. People who contribute to Kansas, but no longer will feel welcome here because of bills like this. Kansas has a history of advancing people's freedoms, of choosing freedom over slavery, of being an early adopter of women's suffrage, something that we celebrated just yesterday. And it's this legacy that we are called on to uphold and to reject this bill. Trans kids belong here. And unlike what was suggested earlier, they're absolutely not a social contagion, a notion that I find absolutely despicable. Trans kids all deserve the right to live authentically and to live their absolute fullest lives. And for the trans kids that are listening, I want you to know that we are listening and we are not going to stop fighting to protect you, to protect your constitutional rights, your right to live authentically, your right to live free from a government that is waging a culture war targeted at you, free from governmental interference. You deserve the ability to live an authentic life to your absolute fullest, and we will not stop fighting to protect those rights and to ensure that those rights are reality. I urge you to vote no against Senate Bill 63. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Chair recognizes Representative Weichel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of House District 10 and as a member of the Health and Human Services Committee, I rise today in opposition to Senate Bill 63. I echo the points that my colleagues have already made and will add a few more. I believe healthcare is a basic human right and that every person should be able to access the healthcare they need when they need it without the interference of politicians. These personal healthcare decisions should be made between children and their parents and their healthcare providers. Gender-affirming care, including for persons under age 18, is considered best medical practice by major medical organizations, including the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, and the American Psychiatric Association. I trust physicians and other healthcare providers in Kansas, and I hope they are taking note today that the majority of the Kansas legislature will limit their ability to work within their scope of practice. I heard many times during proponent testimony and committee discussion that the medicinal and surgical interventions banned for transgender youth in this bill are dangerous. But let me remind you, this bill does not fully ban those medical interventions. It only bans those for transgender youth. This is the literal definition of discrimination. The vague language in this bill is incredibly concerning. The broad definition of healthcare providers seemingly bans social workers, therapists, and other mental health providers from discussing gender identity with trans youth. Based on the committee discussion, I am not convinced that this is supported by everyone that will vote for this bill. But nonetheless, here we are with overly broad language because we did not have the time to sort this out. The personal repercussions of this bill will be devastating. Trans youth will experience mental health crises, and yes, some will attempt to to take their own lives because of this vote today. To my trans friends, constituents, and others, this legislation does not define you or your worth, and I hope you continue to shine bright. The ramifications of this bill will not only affect individuals and healthcare providers, it will also affect our state's ability to attract new business and healthcare providers. I am confident everyone in this chamber supports bringing new business and medical providers to all parts of Kansas. I hope we can focus on these real issues for Kansas very soon, rather than scoring political points based on unfounded fears. For these reasons, I oppose Senate Bill 63.
Is there further discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Schlingensiepen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, body. I rise in opposition to Senate Bill 63. I'd like to talk or define, first of all, two concepts. One is moral dysphoria, the tension between realities that are complex and therefore generally difficult to comprehend on the one hand, and a desire to rid ourselves of the discomfort that comes with that complexity on the other. Under certain circumstances, moral dysphoria can lead to political dysphoria, which I define as the tension between doing what's right versus doing what's popular. We're not here discussing this bill yet again because of any new insights, but solely because political rhetoric has exploited public discomfort with gender dysphoria to the point that people actually believe this is a bill that saves children and youth from mutilation allegedly resulting from ideological, psychological, and medical malpractice. Experts in this area, at least experts by the standards of science and academia, have strongly opposed this legislation. What we are therefore confronted with in this bill is the exploitation of moral dysphoria for political gain. Politically exploited moral dysphoria preys on moral discomfort. It is a strategy to gain power by promising to save people from public perceptions and fear this strategy creates. What do facts, expert opinion, or even people matter when rhetorically you can successfully paint on canvas, so to speak, a reality that erases the complexities of human nature in favor of a comforting delusion? When we succumb to this strategy, we end up with a world devoid of color and devoid of compassion. Often we confuse compassion with a kind of weak-minded failure to grasp reality, when in fact, it is the very opposite. Compassion is cultivating an awareness of the struggles of others, a willingness to be supportive, even as we ourselves struggle to understand their afflictions, and to help them and us to find healing and wholeness. In my congregation, we practice this, and it is not easy. It requires patience, a willingness to listen and learn, but above all, a willingness to put people above a doctrinaire and programmatic denial of their needs and, God forbid, their existence. It has challenged us to give up doctrines that have proven harmful to cultivating compassion that once justified our blindness, even our hostility toward neighbors unlike ourselves. It has been a difficult journey, but it has proven the right one because it has been healing for us all. Body, I submit that we are not here because of any new insights. We are voting on the same bill once again because those favoring it have the power to change the outcome. I know many of us, not just on the cold side of the aisle, have serious misgivings about this bill, but we'll vote for it anyway. Friends, we should not be politicians. Rather, we should be politicians, people who care about the well-being of all people and work toward it even though it isn't easy, even though it isn't popular. This bill is an easy out. It seeks to alleviate moral dysphoria at the potential cost of people's well-being and even lives. Its passage will, I believe, demonstrate our collective failure to exercise true moral and political leadership. Will demonstrate our inability to deal with political dysphoria i.e. the tension between a desire to be in power on the one hand and doing the right thing by our neighbors on the other. In this case, doing the right thing means to vote the bill down. Why? Because it seeks to solve a problem we here do not understand and that we here are not competent to weigh in on. We can leave this matter to children, their parents, and to the professionals whose help they seek and who have the competence to discern the nuances involved and the best treatments. Because excuse me, I'd like to remind us of Tammy Faye Baker Messner. As a kid, I used to watch the PTL Club quite a bit, and I followed her and Jim's career, also their downfall, and I followed hers in particular because she came to embrace the LGBTQ community in surprising ways. And she said, "We're all just people made out of the same old dirt, and God didn't make any junk." Of all people, we should not disagree about this. And we should refrain from legislating issues we are uncomfortable with and whose complexity we do not understand or worse, do not wish to comprehend. If we err, let it be on the side of compassion and a willingness to understand. As one who takes very seriously his discipleship to the one who died on the cross so that our eyes might be opened to the love and care we owe our neighbors, all neighbors, I pray that we will recognize that this bill is not just potentially physically and mentally harmful to many, but potentially morally harmful to us all. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise today in opposition of SB 63. I know that over the past few years, I've made my concerns known about issues with trying to tackle gender-affirming care as a body of legislators who are not intimately familiar with the processes that go along with it. Social transitioning being one. We fought hard in committee yesterday to try to add some amendments that would do some harm reduction for our youth who are having to witness and experience this. Unfortunately, those amendments were not successful. However, I want to point out that social transitioning is one of the most important and the most common form of transitioning for all transgender youth. So with that, I have an amendment.
The amendment appears short. The clerk will read.
On page 2 by striking all in lines 3 through 6, in line 23 by striking all after D, by striking all in lines 24 through 28, in line 29 by striking E, by striking all in lines 33 through 37, on page 1 in the title, in the line 5 by striking all after the semicolon, in line 6 by striking all before prohibiting.
Representative, would you like to explain your amendment?
I would, thank you, Mr. Chair. What this amendment does is it removes all language that would prohibit transgender youth from socially transitioning and make sure that treatment providers, including mental health professionals, would be able to work within their scope of practice by supporting children who have chosen to socially transition, since surgical and medical transitioning is off of the table. Now, you will note I said surgical. I do want to mention that that is a very rare instance. And so with this, we want to make sure that we are focusing on the true aspect that we can change and the way that we can really protect our trans youth and their mental health by making sure that we protect their ability to socially transition. which includes going by their preferred pronouns, using their preferred name, dressing in the manner that they would prefer, without putting at risk any state employee or anyone who works within a state building, both of which been left undefined, and any healthcare provider, which is also undefined, from any civil liability, which would put them at risk for using these preferred pronouns and chosen names and acknowledging and respecting the manner of dress of our transgender youth in Kansas.
Does any member wish to speak to the amendment? The chair recognizes Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, representatives. I feel this is an unfriendly amendment. It insinuates that our bill, the bill that I'm carrying, prevents children from wearing the clothes they want to wear, appearing the way they want to appear, using the names they want to use. There's nothing in the bill that prohibits children from doing that. So it's an unfriendly amendment. Thank you.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? The chair recognizes Representative Sawyer Clayton.
Thank you. I'd just like the carrier of the amendment to stand for a question, please.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Just looking at some definitions, because I don't serve on this committee, the previous speaker, the carrier of the bill, mentioned that apparently it doesn't prohibit children from using pronouns or their preferred name. Could you just offer some clarification on that as far as the base bill is concerned?
Sure. So yeah, children would be able to use their preferred pronoun and chosen name. However, state employees who care for children would not be able to affirm youth in their care, to dress in the manner they desire, use those pronouns as part of their day-to-day life, even with parental support, including social workers, teachers, school guidance counselors, state employees, and many more, since state employees undefined.
So under this bill as it currently stands, so I, as a mother, if I told my child's teachers and the school professionals that my child preferred to either go by gender neutral or different pronouns than they were assigned at birth, even if I gave them permission as a mother and gave these state employees permission, under this bill as it currently stands, they would not be able to do that, even with me acting as a parent, as I prefer the teachers to act?
Yes, correct. This question was asked of the revisers in committee yesterday, and they did confirm that it could impact their ability to do so, and they could potentially be held civilly liable.
And so what this amendment would do is it would remove this vague provision.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I rise in support of this amendment, frankly, because I think one of the things that we talk a lot about, and if you saw the president's executive order this morning, one of the things that we hear frequently mentioned is government acting against parental wishes. Well, ultimately, what we determine in our households, and we say this quite a bit, what we determine in our households is how we choose to appropriately raise our children. I, as a mother, if I have that conversation with my child's principals or administrators or teachers or any other employees, and I say how I prefer them to treat my child, that is my business and my right as a parent. I support this amendment because it removes any of those vague attacks on my right as a parent. I respect your rights as parents to raise your children as you see fit, and I think that you respect mine. I would like to think that you would. So I would like you to rise in support of this amendment simply because it strikes that vague language and clarifies this a bit more. So if you support parental rights, you'll be a yes. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, Representative Meyer, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that there were some really great points made by the representative who just came before me, and these are definitely where my concerns come from. We do not want to put into jeopardy anyone who regularly treats our children with mental health, from their mental health capacity, or in a school district setting, or in any other capacity as a state employee yet undefined, or within a state building, yet undefined. So with that, I would implore you to please seriously consider how broad the language is in this bill and how important it is to strike these sections so that we can protect our state workers, including those who work in the foster system and DCF, teachers, mental health professionals, counselors, social workers, and so forth, from any civil liability when trying to affirm and respect the youth that they serve. Thank you. I close.
Representative, do you close on your amendment?
I close my amendment.
You've heard the motion by Representative Meyer to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, no. The noes appear to have it. Division has been called for. The clerk will open the roll and you may vote. Seeing 15 hands, a roll call is in order. Has every member had the opportunity to vote? Clerk will close the roll. Does any member wish to change their vote? Seeing none, with 31 having voted yea and 84 voting nay, the motion fails. We're back on the bill. Does anybody wish to? I apologize, Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that you all took the time to hear my concerns about that last section. Because of those concerns and because we were not able to come to a compromise on that language, I do have another amendment to offer.
The amendment appears short. The clerk will read.
On page 1, in line 28, after profession by inserting but does not include an individual who is licensed by the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Also on page 1, in the title, in line 3, by striking treating and inserting providing certain treatment to.
Representative, do you wish to explain your amendment?
I would, thank you, Mr. Chair. Despite what critics may try to say, the practice of providing gender-affirming care is well-researched, peer-reviewed, evidence-based, and safe. The care provided is done in concert with not only the parents and caregivers of the child, but also a long list of providers, including mental health therapists, psychiatrists, endocrinologists, pediatricians, and specialists. The process of affirming a child's gender is not absolute, nor is it done in haste. The majority of children experiencing gender dysphoria spend many years working with mental health professionals to address their complex needs prior to determining if a referral to a specialist is appropriate. The guidelines are not loose, and ethical practice is center to any medical or mental health professional's treatment goals and timeline. Providing assessments and mental health care to children with symptoms of gender dysphoria is always the first step in the process. Mental health professionals strive to help parents, caregivers, and their gender nonconforming child work through the complexities of treating not only their gender dysphoria, but other possible co-occurring mental health concerns. If this bill were to pass unamended, it would prevent mental health professionals from offering the care and therapeutic services to the youth they serve by making it illegal to provide them with gender-affirming therapeutic services. What does that mean? Again, that means using a child's preferred pronouns, using their preferred name, respecting and helping them socially transition if and when appropriate, and addressing many other typical struggles that most youth and teens who are not transgender or gender nonconforming seek therapy for every day across our state. The author of this bill and the proponents have tried to lead us to believe that their goal is to protect our children's mental health. But by not amending this bill to remove those who are licensed under the BSRB, they are going directly against their stated goal. This will lead providers to be at risk of civil liability for working within their scope of practice, drive much-needed mental health providers out of our state, and prevent the children you claim to want to protect from receiving the only care that would be available, which would avoid medical intervention. Thank you. And I'll stand for questions.
Does anyone wish to speak to the amendment? The chair recognizes Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative. This is considered an unfriendly amendment. Thank you.
Does any member wish to speak to the amendment? The chair recognizes Representative Haskins. Thank you, Mr. Chair. If the carrier of the amendment would please stand for a question, I would appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Representative.
If I'm understanding your amendment, this would also help those that are in school counselors, school psychologists, anyone that's licensed to help and assist with mental health. Is that correct?
Absolutely. This excludes anyone who would be a prescribing physician and would protect those under the BSRB, which includes psychologists, mental health professionals, LMFTs, LPCs, and social workers.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem.
Colleagues, I rise in opposition of the bill, but also in favor of this amendment. And I would disagree with the carrier of the bill stating that this amendment is harmful to the bill. It is trying to improve the lives of our students. And I want to take a point here that I've tried really hard to become friends and make relationships across the aisle. And I want to say that I do that for the fact that it's far more enjoyable to come to work when you enjoy your colleagues, right? I also do that because I don't know everything. And when I'm in doubt, I go and seek out advice, and they give the advice. Now, I'm 53 years old, and I'm still having questions, and I'm still trying to figure out how to live my life. I want you to imagine you're 14, and you have this new term that comes up, this gender dysphoria. You don't know what that means. I guarantee you didn't know what that meant when you were 14. I know I didn't. I didn't know much when I was 14. But yet all of a sudden I decide that I need help. Who should they go to if they are in the school? Let's say you want to pick a college major. Who do you go to? You go to your counselor. Let's say you want to make sure that you have an understanding of what my learning program should be. You go to the school psychologist. Let's say you have an injury, you go to the school nurse. These are licensed professionals trained. They have a code of conduct that they have to follow. But based off the act on page 2, where you see that no state employee, they can't do their job. Now, I know I've lost half of you. I see your looks. I've been a professor. I know when the cool people in the back are not paying attention, and I can tell you right now that I respect your right to sit and listen to what you choose to listen. I also respect the right that if you have the decision rights, you can make the decision you want. But I want you to pause, and I want you to think about the fact how we need humans, how we need people. And if I have questions, I should be able, without punishment, seek answers from those who I trust. I would encourage you to support this. Look, this is a bad bill, and my goal is never to make a bad bill better, but I also can read the room, and I will tell you that this will at least eliminate some of my concerns associated with it. Because the CDC states that we should have, for school psychologists, the ratio is 1 to 250.
For school counselors, it's 1 to 500. In Kansas, our ratio is 1 school psychologist to 1,200 students. Let me repeat that. 1,200 students are being served by 1 school psychologist. We're not even in the ballgame when it comes to helping our students with mental health. We need to stop. We need to pause. We need to think. Our colleague before this came up and said, how many 300,000 students have identified as being transgender? Let's adopt that number, 300,000. Not question how they came to that decision, but they at least decided. Imagine if they are lonely and they can't find the answer. Here's the last thing I will leave you with, and I want you to really think about this. What if they are right? We have difference of opinions upon when a child is on gender. But you can't deny the fact that when I was a baby, I didn't know what my gender was. It was assigned to me. What if later in their life they don't agree with that assignment? What should they do? And what if they're right? You have an obligation to protect those who can't fight for themselves. This amendment at least moves that in the direction. I support this amendment. Colleagues, let's do what's right. Thank you, sir. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, Representative, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I said earlier, this is the least we can do. Obviously, those of us in opposition to this bill do not want this bill at all. But what we are doing today is practicing a skill in the mental health community called harm reduction. That is what we are doing. We are trying our best to give trans kids across the state of Kansas the best chance they have at making sure that they can at least get the mental health help that they need. Please think this through. This bill is too broad and too vague, and this really puts the lives of our children, the livelihood of our mental health professionals, and our school psychologists at risk. If you want to do right by the children that you state that you are trying to protect, then you will pass this amendment and remove individuals who serve under the BSRB from the provisions of this bill. Thank you, and I close.
You've heard the motion by Representative Meyer to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, nay. Noes appear to have it. Division has been called. The clerk will open the roll and you may vote. Seeing 15 hands, a roll call is in order. Has every member had the opportunity to vote? The clerk will close the roll. Does any member wish to change their vote? Representative Will Carpenter votes no. Any further changes of vote? Seeing none, 31 having voted in favor and 85 against, the motion fails. We're back on the bill. Representative Meyer? You done? Okay. Does anyone wish to speak to the bill? The chair recognizes Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if the carrier of the bill would stand for a quick question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. In our committee, we have had a little confusion about the impact this will have on public school employees. So my question really is about intent. Your intent when you wrote or proposed this bill. Is it your intention to potentially penalize public school employees with this bill? Is it your intention to potentially penalize public school employees with this bill?
Thank you, Representative. I don't believe there are any penalties for public school employees. The intention of the bill is to provide proven treatment for these children that are suffering with gender dysphoria, rather than following a radical gender ideology that promotes unproven treatments. And I think the whole idea of school teachers not being able to teach if they can't promote radical gender ideology is falsehood. I think we had conferees who said they weren't going to be able to teach. We weren't going to be able to find teachers if they can't teach gender ideology. I think that's really missing the point of this whole bill. This bill is to use those treatments that are effective and are proven, particularly safety and efficacy. Those are the two issues that we use in the healthcare field for deciding whatever we do. And these gender-affirming care treatments are not safe and they are not effective. And so I think this bill is very appropriate. But as far as intent for school teachers or school employees, it would be that they not focus on gender-affirming care, but that they actually teach. So thank you.
Could I ask one follow-up question for clarity then?
Sure.
I appreciate that physicians and medical professionals at large make a pledge to do no harm. And similarly, I'm an educator. We have standard practice that we try to meet kids where they are and treat them with dignity. So I think maybe you and I are talking over each other and missing each other. So I'm going to try to ask this in a more pointed way. If a teacher were to use a transgender child's preferred pronouns, in your opinion, would this bill, if passed unamended, potentially penalize that teacher?
My understanding is if they're just trying to be respectful and they're not promoting radical gender ideology, then being respectful is fine.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You know, in this body, when we write a bill, words really do matter. And I think when we rush through things, we mess up. Last year, this bill did not pass narrowly. And I have been told that there were conversations in the Speaker's office with revisers questioning just this very thing. Does this impact teachers? And the answer was yes. Therefore, during our committee meeting yesterday, I proposed an amendment that would exclude public school employees from the entire bill. And that amendment went down in flames. Everyone voted on party lines. We talk a lot about the need for educators. We talk about retention. We talk about burnout. We talk about treating teachers as the professionals that they are. And this is an opportunity for us to send a message to our educators, a message of respect, a message that we don't want to pass a bill with unintended consequences because we were too sloppy in our work. The carrier of the bill has told us it's not his intention. It's not his intention for teachers to lose their teachers' licenses. It's not his intention for them to be held civilly liable. But that is what this bill does. And I tried yesterday to amend it to no avail. And I just want you to really think this through. In my past life, before I had children, I was a first grade teacher and an English language learner teacher. Because of this experience, I really feel compelled to step in and advocate for our educators whenever I can. Now I'm going to confess, I'm not as prepared as I would like to be today. In fact, I wasn't as prepared as I would have liked to have been yesterday because the processes we're going through this year are not typical. So to those new legislators, I was new last year. I was kind of thrown in without orientation back in December, and I just swam with the current. But I want you to know, I'm really disappointed that this controversial bill is the first vote, the first meaningful vote that you'll take on this floor. Because this is not how we would like to do business, not on either side of the aisle. I would challenge our leadership to slow down a little bit, because we do have time. And to the representative from Shawnee's point, when we knocked doors this summer to get reelected, people said to us, property tax, price of eggs, can't afford to get my kid in soccer, having to work 2 or 3 jobs. My teacher is having to work 2 or 3 jobs. Our words matter. This bill could, I would argue will, harm teachers, school counselors, school nurses, school paraprofessionals, school administrators, school social workers, school audiologists, school speech and language pathologists, even bus drivers. These are people we rely on. These are people we trust with our children, just like we trust our medical providers with our children. And I would argue that the carrier of the bill is doing teachers a grave disservice when he insinuates or even says that teachers are indoctrinating children. I can assure you as a teacher, if we could convince them to do anything, it would be to wear deodorant. You laugh, but I'm serious. No teacher is trying to convert children to anything. We're there to teach them. We meet them as they are. We should not be penalized for treating them with dignity, for establishing a rapport by doing something as small as using their preferred pronoun. It's not much. Like the representative from Overland Park said, as a parent, I should be able to say to my teacher, please be a safe person with them. My child prefers this nickname. My child prefers this pronoun. In our family, we are gender affirming. And personally, in my family, I don't think this bill will impact me or my children, but I don't know. I would charge that you don't know if it's going to impact you or your family either, because you may not be a safe person for them. Your bill today will be on record, whether they take a picture of it from the gallery or not. Your vote today is something you're going to have to answer for to a higher power. In my religion, I'm a Unitarian Universalist, and we have 7 principles, and the one that I hold most dear is the inherent right and dignity that each of us possess. It's not something we earn, it's not something we're given it's ours. And I would argue that as a legislator, you don't have the power to take that away. I'll speak once more because I have something else to say, but I think I'll just leave this by saying, as a teacher, as a mom, as a legislator, words matter. This is a sloppy bill. It was a sloppy bill last time. We've gotten clarification from the revisers. This will penalize public school employees, the people you trust with your children and grandchildren. A vote no will send this back, and perhaps they can come back with a bill that is more well thought out. Thank you, sir.
Is there any further discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, I don't know a lot of you. I'm not in committee with a lot of you, but anybody who does know me knows that I am a very proficient taker of notes, and I keep those notes close by and at hand so that I always know what's going on so I don't get lost. I believe there has been a misstatement on the floor today, and I know we would never want to let a misstatement happen because we want to make our decisions based on the complete truth. It was said that this bill does not affect a child's ability to use pronouns or their manner of dress. I would like to refer you to the supplemental note on page 3. I quote, "Social transitioning would mean acts other than medical or surgical interventions that are undertaken for the purpose of presenting as a member of the opposite sex, including the changing of an individual's preferred pronouns or manner of dress." Now, I ask you, who is going to be the wardrobe police at school? Who's going to be in charge of the nanny state? What's going to be deemed appropriate attire? And what's going to be deemed inappropriate? Boyfriend cut jeans. Are we going to have to cross those out for our female students? What about all those kids who are wearing Chiefs shirts to school the next 2 weeks? That's a really big deal in my community. A lot of those are unisex cut. Are we going to have to cross those out for everybody? Are they okay for boys? Are they not okay for girls? I'm not sure. Who's going to manage this? You know, when I was in second grade, it was the great year of 1980 when George Brett had his big run for 400. And I was George Brett for Halloween one year. I had the pants and the jersey, the bubble gum in my cheek and the hat. I now realize I would be in violation of this bill just because I loved baseball so much. That's a real shame. When my kids were little, they would have days where they played Mike Sweeney and Joe Randa. The Royals' blood runs strong in our family, but I don't know if they'd been playing Mike Sweeney and Joe Randa on the preschool playground at their Christian preschool. Would they have been called out as inappropriate? That's a real shame because those are pretty fine gentlemen that are good role models for our people. So I just ask, where is this going to stop? We start with interfering with parental rights. Next, am I going to need to get a long skirt to be on this floor? Am I going to have my wrists covered at all times? Are we going to need head coverings? I don't know where it ends. And this is really getting out of control and infringing on our rights. And I will be opposing this bill because parents in my district and throughout this state are perfectly capable of parenting their own children without our interference.
Is there further discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, during my professional career, I attended many leadership training classes, and usually I was able to pull out a nugget or two to apply to my job when I got back to the desk. And when I was composing my comments for today, I came across one of those nuggets, came back to me, that you don't have to be one of to stand with. You don't have to be one of to stand with. So today, I'm standing with those children that are diagnosed with gender dysphoria, their parents and their families. And I'm fortunate that there weren't any elected officials around when our daughter was born that banned medical care for her. See, in 1989, it was a pretty good year for us in the Schreiber family. Our daughter Gretchen was born in Wesley Hospital down in Wichita. And she was, when I was in the delivery room with Angie, my wife, and Gretchen was born, and they scooped her up and put her in a nice warm bassinet. I'm sure there's a medical term for what they put her in. But Angie was concerned that, something was wrong. And the nurse said, don't worry about it. We just got to run some tests. We'll be back in. From my vantage point, I knew something was wrong. And I turned to Angie and I lied to her, said everything was fine. Our daughter was born with Bacterial association, which is a specific set of birth defects, physical birth defects, that affects probably around 350 babies a year in the United States. The pediatrician, when he came up to Angie's room, he told us about Bacterial. He said it's also called Vauders, so we had two different names going in our heads. He couldn't tell us much about it, but he had a medical textbook with him, and there was a paragraph in there about the condition. So 7 weeks later, Gretchen had her first surgery at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. And that was just the first of 20 plus surgeries over the next 10 or 12 years. That same year, in 1989, and I hesitate to use TV as a note in my remarks, but there was a new TV series called Life Goes On. And in it, there was an actor named Chris Burke who has Down syndrome. And he played a character in Life Goes On that had Down syndrome. And the episode I saw that I remember, he was running, his friends had encouraged him to run for freshman class president. And he got real excited. He was invigorated. He was ready to go to it. And little did he know that his friends did it as a cruel joke. He found out about the joke a little bit before he gave his kind of introductory speech before the election. And he went ahead with his speech. And the only part of that speech I remember is, "We have dreams too." You see, he had been put down as someone as inferior or really not good enough. His classmates, thought they'd pull a little joke on him. And even though he didn't succeed in the election, I think he still won. You don't have to be one of to stand with. So fast forward to 6th grade in Emporia. Gretchen's in 6th grade. It's my turn to pick her up at school. And as most 6th graders, she's pretty talkative usually, probably too much. When I picked her up, she was very quiet. And we were driving along and, I said, "Gretchen, is something wrong?" And she just flatly said, "Dad, all I want is to have someone to sit with me at lunch." She wasn't crying. Her voice was very flat, was defeated. She knew she was different. And, she couldn't play with the other kids like they did. And because of the full body brace she had to wear and the head apparatus on the side, she had a radio club arm. Over 25 years later, I can still tell you exactly where I was on Merchant Street in Emporia when she said those words. And that pain that I felt that day was nothing compared to the pain that she conveyed in those remarks. And that leaves me in the firm belief that no one should be banned from receiving appropriate medical care because they're different. Gender dysphoria is not a fad. Like, this dates me, I know, but when bell-bottom jeans were a thing back when I was growing up. It's a medically recognized condition in the DSM manual. Uses defined protocols, and thankfully, and I appreciate this for the people that created the bill, it does not ban mental health therapy for the treatment of gender dysphoria. However, it does ban the use of puberty blockers, hormone therapy, or in very rare cases, transition surgery. It also creates what seems to me to be a new set of legal penalties unique to the treatment of gender dysphoria by which a physician would be subject to if found guilty. My background has always been based in the sciences. So when this legislation started, I began to do research on the treatment of gender dysphoria. I called a pediatrician in Johnson County who has worked with youth with gender dysphoria for over 25 years. I asked her every question I could. Nothing was off the table. There were no softballs. She said it's not uncommon to have therapy last several years. However, as puberty approaches, the use of puberty blockers and/or hormone therapy may be an option to consider. And as with any medication, risks are clearly discussed by the physician, with the patient, and if a minor parental consent is required. As I've mentioned before, my family and I have had years and years of experience at the Mayo Clinic. Mayo is consistently rated one of the top medical centers in the United States, and people come to the Mayo Center in Rochester from around the world. And we met several of them when we stayed at the Ronald McDonald House there. Their website has excellent information on gender dysphoria, its care, its risks, and there are risks, and various possibilities for treatment, including therapy, puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and in rare cases, surgery. Regardless of the treatment, parental consent is still required. And I trust their advice without hesitation because I have firsthand experience with the expertise and the care at Mayo. We had to give consent on every surgery Gretchen had, and some weren't successful. Some had minor risks, and some very grave risks. I also checked another major medical center, the Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, Ohio, on their website. Similar information that Mayo has about the protocols, the risk, and potential care regimens. I also decided to check, and I don't know why this came into my mind, but I checked the American Society for Plastic Surgeons website. And they don't mention gender dysphoria, but they do perform cosmetic surgery on minors, not frequently, but they'll do breast enhancements, breast reductions, rhinoplasty, which is surgery for the nose, or otoplasty, surgery on the ears. And their discussions of treatment and surgical risks when doing this for minors is very similar to what Mayo and the Cleveland Clinic have on their websites, including the evaluation of the patient to determine if they are suitable candidates for the procedure. And if a minor, again, parental consent. I've heard the term today, radical gender ideology. With the utmost confidence, and with over a decade of witnessing care at the Mayo Clinic, I can tell you, they don't practice ideological care. They practice medical care. I've trusted the life of my daughter, my wife, my parents, my in-laws to the Mayo Clinic. And if they say there are acceptable treatment options for gender dysphoria, far be it for me to tell them they're wrong. Since the legislation was introduced last year, I talked with two families who are considering leaving Kansas and moving to a state that doesn't ban such care. These families are good community members, and I would hate to see them leave the state. And you know, when they talk to me about their potential move, you know, they don't cry. Their words sound just like Gretchen's. Exhausted, dejected, and confused. After all, just like your kids and mine, these kids have dreams too. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you can join me in opposing this legislation. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there further discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hold a PhD in nursing and a master's in education, and I have dedicated over 18 years to the profession of school nursing and nursing in general. I've been a school nurse for over 11 years. In this role, I am uniquely positioned in the lives of students, playing a vital role in supporting the health and the well-being and the ultimate educational success and lifelong achievement of children. As a nurse, I am bound by the ANA Code of Ethics, which affirms that, and I quote, "The nurse establishes a trusting relationship and advocates for the rights, the health, and the safety of recipients of nursing care." I am also bound to the School Nurse Standards of Practice, which states the school nurse integrates ethics into all aspects of practice, and the school nurse demonstrates advocacy in all roles and settings. Standing here today as a school nurse, I will speak truth, and I will advocate for the health and the safety of our children. It is also crucial to understand that all children are unique and must be treated with the utmost respect and dignity. As a school nurse, I walk the line of both the education world and the health world. We get to balance FERPA and we get to balance HIPAA. We have to know a lot about both fields in order to accurately and safely care for the children. So let's just take a moment and look at the education side of things. Kansas educational standards. Kansas has developed educational standards that align with brain development. Why? Because by providing age-appropriate learning goals that match cognitive growth stages, we ensure that children acquire skills when they are best able to process and retain the new information. If a 5-year-old cannot comprehend cursive and must learn the basic ABCs, he or she cannot comprehend taking medication to attempt to change their gender. If a 10-year-old child cannot comprehend 3-digit multiplication, they cannot comprehend taking medication to attempt to change their gender. I can guarantee you when that precious little 5-year-old or 10-year-old comes into my office after falling on the playground and they need an ice pack or a hug, they cannot begin to understand the ramifications and the lifelong consequences and the irreversible damage of medication and surgical treatment. Furthermore, if a 15-year-old child cannot construct arguments that all circles are similar, and yes, this is a standard for 9th and 10th graders in our math courses, they don't have the brain development to agree to have their genitals surgically removed. Regarding the health side of things, it is completely normal for children to experience discomfort, confusion, frustration, and even anger about their bodies at various stages of development, and not just during puberty. These feelings can manifest in many ways, from irritability to emotional distress, as they learn to navigate themselves and who they are. However, a child wanting to cut off their genitals to become the opposite sex is delusional and unhealthy, and these students have mental health disorders, and I worry deeply about these vulnerable children. The National Association of School Nurses states multiple times in their school nursing textbook that it is important for school nurses to utilize evidence-based information. We gather the evidence by monitoring the physical health development of children. How do we do this? We use growth charts. Growth charts have been around for decades. The growth charts are divided into two categories: male and female. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention provides these growth charts. You can get on your phones right now, go straight to the CDC website, and you can see there are two growth charts, male and female. When I use my National Association of School Nursing textbook, it only has two growth charts, male and female. There are no growth charts for transgender children because we do not make growth charts on mental health issues. Our national and state organizations want to ensure that school nurses follow evidence, and evidence is clear that puberty blockers cause irreversible damage. Eugenic sterilization is not a side effect, it is a predictable outcome. Over the past few years, some of the hardest conversations I have ever had to have been with children and parents that are horrifically enduring the psychological manipulation occurring in the health and education fields regarding gender dysphoria. When parents hear that their child is suffering from gender dysphoria and might hurt or kill themselves, they freeze in this desperate panic and will do whatever doctors and clinicians say they should because, as was mentioned earlier, would you rather have a dead child or a living one? But the evidence is clear. Children that receive medication or surgical alterations for treatment of gender dysphoria have a much higher rate of suicide than those that do not receive any treatment. Evidence is also clear that children are experiencing suicide ideations, do not commit suicide when they receive the proper mental health therapy and counseling. Let me be clear, the suicide narrative that surrounds gender medicalization is among the most manipulative device activists are using to instill fear into parents and to children already reeling in confusion. Children suffering from gender dysphoria or related mental health issues have a right to be protected. As a school nurse, I can stand here today and tell you that no child has the ability to comprehend the long-term and lasting effects of chemical and/or surgical treatments on their bodies. Children are vulnerable, and they must be protected. And one last thing I want you to remember. In the state of Kansas, children need a signed parent permission slip to go on a school field trip to the zoo, but they do not need a signed permission slip to begin experimental medication and or surgical castration. Ladies and gentlemen, our children are worth fighting for and protecting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there further discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Berquist.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I come to you as a representative. I come to you as a person that had some education not similar to some of the ones you've already heard. My education was mostly formative in a home for 18 years as a growing up kid. I grew up in a loving home with imperfect parents, and I was raised not to be imperfect, but to try to follow a good example. As a young man, as a young imperfect man, but a loving man, I became a guy, I had the thrill of a lifetime. A little baby girl was born into my life, the life of her and her mother, born totally dependent on the ones that were around her. And when a young dad picks up a little baby for the first time, it's scary because you're scared, because they're so fragile and they're so damageable, and you don't want to hurt them. So that's the time that you really start to realize the words tender, fragile, helpless, dependent. All of us here, to some degree, had experience in that very world. We made it through the first few months of life without being able to feed ourselves, but being fed by somebody else. We had the experience that somebody else chose to make. Well, my parents made, as imperfect as they were, they made a choice that their parents made as imperfect parents in a world that's full of trouble and choices. They made a choice to raise up a family and to do the best they could. My mother grew up as an orphan, but she still had the raising of people that cared about her. And she was entrusted to people in an orphanage that could care for her. Immediately, you learned the meaning of protection, to feed, to clothe, to lock the doors at night, to protect the stovetops from little fingers, to keep the car keys out of young teenagers' hands. And yes, to protect from strangers that might do them harm. While they're in our care, we do those things the best we know how. Please think about protecting the lives of our children. Someday our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, which I have some of all, may choose to experience some of the same joys and challenges that we've experienced. And so to preserve the ability and to be a part of future generations, I do ask you to support SB 63 so that they can make those choices for themselves to extend their future, to have generations of people that come behind them. And without this, there's much less possibility of that happening. Please support SB 63.
Is there further discussion? Chair recognizes Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The notion of this bill, gender affirming care ban, has come before us before, but it is a different bill than what we have seen. So in my time from first reading it yesterday and what I bring before you now, it was a lot of how does this truly impact our kids, all of our kids? And in asking questions about the circumstances, if a child does get injured on the playground, wherever, sustain injuries, perhaps to their genitals, how would that work for coming to the emergency room, meeting with the physician? And in this question and answering, there did arise a question in the situation if a child attempts to perform one of these surgeries themselves. if a healthcare provider then has to decide if completing such surgical procedure would then be considered treatment of the child's gender dysphoria. A couple other examples for this that I could give you would be female genital mutilation, which is illegal in Kansas, and other types of surgeries that could be performed outside of a medical setting. So I believe that the current exemptions in this bill are not adequate to ensure that these children, if they come in for emergency care, that they would be given that care with no questions asked about their gender identity. And so I do have an amendment.
The amendment appears short. The clerk will read.
On page 3, in line 35, by striking the first comma and inserting "or," also in line 35, after the second comma, by inserting "regardless of the cause of such infection or injury or the treatment of any," in line 37, after "B," by inserting "regardless of who performed the procedure," also in line 37, after the period, by inserting "a health provider shall not be required to inquire as to the gender identity of the patient before treating such infection, injury, disease, or disorder."
Representative, would you like to explain your amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this again, if you want to take a look at this, page 3, lines 35 through 41, this is the current language provides a certain exception for a physician to offer care if there had been a previous gender-affirming care surgery for this individual child. But what it does not allow a physician to offer that care with no questions asked about gender and gender dysphoria. So in the case of a child seeking medical emergency care, I want to make sure that all children have this same access to this treatment. Without this amendment, there could be circumstances where trans children do not have the same access to emergency care as other children. And we want to make sure that our physicians can tend to these very serious, very sensitive medical emergencies without disruption. And so that is why I offer this amendment, and I would stand for questions.
Is there anyone wishing to speak to the amendment? Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, representatives. It's my opinion that this amendment is unnecessary and unfriendly. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, Representative Hoy, you may close.
I can assure you that this amendment is not unfriendly, though I would say I'm going to not support the bill either way. But please think through how you really intend this bill to operate. I firmly believe many of those of us in this body would view that as an unintended consequence if a physician has to take extra steps to ask questions and perhaps determine if a trans child is in fact trans, and this medical procedure was done outside of a medical setting, that they may be in a position to deny care. That to me is very unacceptable. I think this serves more as a technical amendment. It does not do much to the underlying bill itself, and I would urge you to support this amendment. Thank you.
Representative, you close on your amendment.
I close and move the amendment.
You've heard the motion by Representative Hoy to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, nay. Nays appear to have it. Division has been called. The clerk will open the roll. Seeing 15 hands, roll call is in order. The roll is still open, Representative. Has every member had the opportunity to vote? Clerk will close the roll. Does any member wish to change their vote? Seeing none, with 29 voting yea and 83 voting nay, the motion fails. Representative Hoy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to reiterate my opposition to this bill. I believe that trans rights are human rights, and I'm very sorry to all of the trans Kansans and their families who will feel harm and sorrow because of this bill. I stand with you. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Carr for the second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the carrier of the bill please stand for a question?
Yes, thank you.
I've heard a lot of medical talk since this debate has started. Could you please clarify something for me with respect to the denial of care? And I'll give you a scenario. In the event that there is a child who has mental disabilities or a situation, let's say autism, and that child happens to be, as oftentimes happens, they mature physically at a rapid rate, and so you've got a 10-year-old, 6 foot, 200-pound young man who's having a very difficult time being controlled, if it would be a good term, at home by his much smaller in stature mother. Would those puberty blockers that I hear that they use sometimes to slow that down, or whatever it takes to calm some of that aggression, would that child then be able to be treated, or no?
This bill does not prohibit that kind of treatment. However, it sounds like that puberty blockers in that scenario would probably not be appropriate. This bill only approaches, it doesn't single out trans kids, by the way. It singles out diagnosis that shows that these treatments are ineffective and unsafe, and they can still be used. The drugs can still be used in other diagnoses, whether the kid's trans or straight or gay or whatever. But nothing in this bill would prohibit that person from, doesn't even approach anything that would prohibit treatment of that person.
So, in fact, if there's no predisposed diagnosis or admission of the child being trans, then they're not barred at all, or this bill wouldn't affect any treatment that they would get, even if that treatment was the equivalent of treatment that you might provide to a child who was trans. I'm trying to make this, where do we draw that line at? Is it an admission? Is it a predisposed diagnosis? Or do we just treat the child as if it's a child?
The bottom line is we treat children with the most effective treatment possible. It's just saying that a healthcare provider, particularly who tries to change a boy into a girl or tries to change a boy into a girl, boy into girl or vice versa, that they will be prohibited from using these treatments for doing that. It doesn't prohibit the use of medications otherwise, outside in any other scenario. you did bring up psychiatric illness. There, I wanted to just make a mention that if you look at transgender youth or gender dysphoric youth, there is a high rate of psychiatric illness. And some studies show 80 or 90%. And so a lot of times these children, if they just need counseling, and we want to promote counseling, they need psychiatric meds, sometimes antidepressants, or they need antipsychotics, or they need anxiety meds, or they need ADHD treatment. But there is no prohibition against treating these kids appropriately. It's only prohibiting things that are harmful and promoting things that are helpful, if I could put it in one phrase.
Thank you very much. Clearly, in my opinion, and certainly I would have done more reading had we been allowed more time, but in my opinion, that's exceptionally vague. I was provided an answer, but I'm certainly not clear on what that answer was, because what I heard was that we could still treat those children, provided that the treating physician wasn't making an effort to change the child's sex. That's in fact what the carrier just said. So this bill, the portions that I read of this bill, certainly don't address that, because there are other portions of this bill that don't speak directly to just changing the child's sex. So I would urge you to vote against this bill and recommend that you come back with something that's a little more appropriate. I think this was rushed. Certainly, 90% of the conversation that's been at this podium today was for something other than changing this child's sex. And if the carrier of the bill believes that the bill is exclusive to just changing the child's sex, then the carrier of the bill hasn't read the bill at all himself either. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? The chair recognizes Representative McDonald for the second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I know the hour is late, and I really, really do appreciate that there are so many of you in your seats, making eye contact, actively listening. I'll admit sometimes I get sidetracked when other people are up here, but it really does get distracting when there are conversations going. So good job, everybody. As a newer legislator, I have really tried to prioritize relationships building here. I've tried to extend grace whenever possible, tried to be a listener, tried to find common ground. And when I campaigned this summer and fall, I sincerely made a commitment to reach across the aisle, to listen, to meet in the middle, to compromise. And I'm not really used to not getting my way, I'll admit that. But this job has a way of humbling you. You know, on this issue, it was tricky to campaign about this because people always ask, well, what do you think? And the real truth of the matter is, though I'm a registered Democrat, there are a lot of issues that I take more of a libertarian stance on. And that's the case with this bill. I hear a lot of my friends across the aisle talk to me about less government, less regulation. And when I was knocking doors, I heard that too. People don't want us in their business. People don't think we have better judgment than them. There's a reason politicians aren't very popular or trusted. And I really want us to think hard about what passing a bill like this would do to the public trust. If we pass this legislation, we're sending a very clear message to medical providers who work in Kansas. We're weaponizing the law by punishing medical providers for working within their scope of practice. This is a really slippery slope, my friends. Who are we as a citizen legislature to interfere with these personal medical decisions between parents, their children, and their chosen medical providers? At the risk of impugning our character, I would say that actions like this really stink of arrogance. We are not qualified to weigh in on issues like this. And so I have prepared several amendments, but as an act of good faith, I'm only going to propose one of them.
Body stand at ease while we turn in the amendment. So for the folks who are new to the body, if you have an amendment, please turn it in as soon as you receive it so that it's ready to go when you propose it on the floor. The amendment appears short. The clerk shall read.
On page 4, in line 18, by striking 10 and inserting 2. In line 34, by striking 10 and inserting 2.
Representative, would you like to explain your amendment?
Yes, please. Over here. My apologies for not getting the protocol right. This is the first time I've done this. So when researching this bill, I noticed that the statute of limitations was really long. In fact, this bill says that parents or a child would have 10 years after the date of their 18th birthday. And I asked the revisers if that's in alignment with other statutes of limitations, and I found out that the statute of limitations for civil actions against medical providers for things like medical malpractice or wrongful death is 2 years. So my attempt is a good faith effort to make our statutes in alignment so that this is not a over and beyond statute of limitations.
Does anyone wish to speak to the amendment? Representative, are you done explaining the amendment?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Does anyone wish to speak to the amendment? Seeing none, you may close on, oh, I'm sorry. Representative Lewis.
I have a question for the carrier. I don't believe you were in the legislature, but are you aware that in 2023, we extended the statute of limitations for survivors of child sex abuse to age 31?
Yes, I had a conversation about this morning with some survivors.
Right. I'd like to speak to it. I would just point out that, in fact, we have extended statutes of limitations, and particularly we're doing this in the context of claims that children can bring. And the reason for that is children often need time once they become adults to process what's happened to them in their youth. And so I don't think that the statute of limitations here of 10 years is at all out of line, given that we're dealing with treatments that would have been illegally performed on our youth when they were children. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Chair recognizes Representative Oropeza.
I have a question for the bringer of the amendment.
Thank you. So my question is, for every other pediatrician, regardless of who they treat in the state of Kansas, their malpractice and to bring this types of complaints forward on a healthcare provider is literally 2 years.
My understanding is that, excuse me, my understanding is that physicians who would prescribe gender-affirming care or participate in that would not have access to malpractice insurance due to this legislation.
Okay, so everybody else in the state of Kansas would have access.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. So in looking at this, we are again carving out a very niche and very specific population in which we are okay with, in which we are okay backing or not backing our healthcare providers. And I hope everybody looks at that and is in agreement with this amendment. And I would hope everybody would agree that we need to back our healthcare providers and needing their insurance. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Representative McDonald, you may close.
Thank you, sir. A vote yes on my amendment is the conservative thing to do because this helps to rein in lawsuits. It sends a message to medical providers that we're not coming after them to the greatest extent that we possibly could. And I think it's a reasonable thing to bring our statute of limitations to alignment. I would just point out, this is not criminal. This is not criminal court. This is civil liability. So thank you very much. I close.
You've heard the motion by Representative McDonald to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay? Nays appear to have it. Division has been called. The clerk will open the roll and you may vote. Seeing 15 hands, a roll call is in order. Has every member had the opportunity to vote? Clerk will close the roll. Does any member wish to change their vote? Seeing none, 29 voting yea and 84 voting nay, the motion fails. Representative McDonald, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In good faith, people who are registered as Democrats have brought forth many amendments to try to make this bad bill better. There have been a couple of Republicans who have brought amendments that made this bill worse, in my opinion, one of which makes it go into effect upon the publishing of the journal rather than in July. This does not give families much time to let this sink in. This does not give our teachers much time to understand the danger they will be in within the month. This does not give families much time to regroup and make hard decisions. I hear some of you taking big sighs, and I appreciate your patience and the grace you've shown me. I tried to show the carrier of the bill as much grace as I could today, even letting him clarify his intentions of whether or not educators will be impacted. Clearly, there's a lot of confusion on this bill. It's very, very vaguely written. The conservative thing to do would be to vote no, because this would save us taxpayer lawsuits. This would save us taxpayer dollars on lawsuits. If this is very important, then we should go back and get it right. There's a lot of vagueness in the law. We can't even agree about what a state employee is. We don't even agree what it means to treat someone. Sloppy. I would implore you to vote no. Be courageous. You can sleep at night, and we can come back and try and make this a better bill together. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Oropeza.
Thank you very much. And I have to agree with the former representative who was just here. Thank you for everybody being in their seats and listening and giving this bill some thought. And I have to agree with everybody else who's been up here that this was rushed through and was not very thought well through. But in addition to that, I also listened to the proponents of this bill. And they talked about kids and protecting kids and making sure we're doing the right things for kids, regardless of parental consent, regardless of medical providers we are now dipping into their scope of practice. So in saying that, I also have an amendment for this bill to ensure that we are protecting all kids in the state of Kansas.
The amendment appears short. The clerk shall read.
On page 3, in line 4, by striking "or" and inserting a comma. Also in line 4, after implants, by inserting breast augmentation or rhinoplasty. In line 12, after "of," by inserting sexualizing such child or. In line 17, by striking "or" and inserting a comma. Also in line 17, after augmentation, by inserting "or rhinoplasty." In line 18, by striking "or." In line 21, after "children," by inserting "or." Or growth hormone injections to boost height in healthy children.
Representative, would you like to explain your amendment?
I would love to. So my amendment basically says we are not going to change the bodies of young adolescent children in the state of Kansas because they feel they are not like their peers. And in saying that, over 239,000 cosmetic procedures are done on children between the ages of 13 and 19. And you may ask yourself, why does it go to 19? Because I think if we move that number down to 18, you'd be very, very surprised. But at least at this time, it only says goes to 19. Unfortunately, I was not able to find exact numbers for the state of Kansas because I did try, because I like to present this body with truths of what's happening in the state of Kansas, and to go on and making sure that we're doing the right thing for our state and the right thing for our children. So I do find it, since we are bypassing medical practice and scope, parental consent, and having everybody else bypassed, I believe we should do the same for our healthy children. And if we have, unfortunately, short men, we shouldn't give the option for growth hormones to make them a little bit taller. We wouldn't know the consequences of that long term. Or breast augmentation. Everybody should have to wait till 18 if they would like to have breast augmentation. The same should be the fact of nose jobs, which is the rhinoplasty. And I hope you would be in agreement with me in protecting our children in the state of Kansas. Oh, sorry. I'll stand for questions.
Does anyone wish to speak to the amendment? Okay. Seeing none, Representative, you may close.
Thank you for that, Mr. Speaker. I do appreciate that. And again, I would just like to clarify that I want to make sure we're doing the right thing for the healthy kids in Kansas, and I would hope you would vote for my amendment.
Do you wish to close?
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I close.
You've heard the motion by Representative Oropeza to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, nay. So appear to have it. Division has been called. The clerk will open the roll and you may vote. Now seeing 15 hands, a roll call is in order. Has every member had the opportunity to vote? Clerk will close the roll. Does any member wish to change their vote? Seeing none, with 27 voting in favor and 80 against, the motion fails. Representative Oropeza, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do appreciate that. I was actually very hopeful on this amendment and that we could stand together and make sure that we are doing the right thing for the healthy children in Kansas and to make sure that we are not sexualizing those children and playing into social media and et cetera and every other issue that has been brought to this floor. Unfortunately, I did not see that today, but thank you for considering it.
Is there further discussion? Chair recognizes Representative Martinez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, body. Before this legislation even was proposed, I've always been against surgical procedures for young people. Because they have to have time to get help and therapies and whatever it is they need to make sure that they're making the right decision. Teenagers, I've worked with teenagers for over 20 years, and when they're teenagers, when they reach puberty, going into teenagers, they're confused, especially these days when they have access to so much social media. And there's so many, we cry mental health, mental health. How do we deal with their mental health? Because we're incarcerating kids. Kids are homeless. They're relying on substances. So our kids are confused. So that being said, I thought I'm not for this. But I read this bill, and it's not just about surgical procedures and banning surgical procedures for young people. It's about not allowing them to have that journey that they need, that all young people need to make sense of how they feel. And so when you want to ban how they dress and how they want to refer to themselves, it just doesn't make sense to me. And I'm a pretty sensible person. I'm a pretty fair person. And to do that is wrong. To deny them therapies, to help them make sense of how they're feeling is just wrong. And so if this was a bill, well, I looked at it finally. We didn't have much time. But had this been a bill that proposed a mapped out process in their journey to explore gender dysphoria, I'm not even really sure what all that means, but had they had the opportunity to, if this bill mapped that out for them, if it proposed an appropriate weight for surgical procedures, if it didn't seek to hold liable teachers and healthcare providers, which they should be able to trust, them and their parents. If it didn't do that, I might have supported it, but it doesn't do that. It does just the opposite. And what really bothers me is this is called the Help Not Harm bill. So if we want to help kids, if we really want to help kids, why don't we pass some gun control laws that will keep crazy individuals from going into the schools and killing our kids? How about that? Let's not be a hypocrite. This bill is about canceling culture. That's what it's about. When you deny the opportunity for them to feel how they feel, talk to people about how they feel, make sense of how they feel, but yet you say you want to help kids, that doesn't make sense. I will not be voting for this bill. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Mosley.
Could the carrier of this bill please stand for question?
Thank you.
What is the difference between a trans child and a child diagnosed with gender dysphoria?
Well, gender dysphoria is a mental health term that's used to mean bad feelings. Dysphoria means bad feelings about the gender. A transgender child would be one who's changing from one, or trying to change from one sex to another sex.
So if a child who has not been diagnosed with gender dysphoria has begun to transition socially, would they be met without intervention? But if a child who has been diagnosed with gender dysphoria, would there be intervention in that case?
I don't believe I understand. I'm sorry.
So a child who's just trans, who has socially transitioned, but they have not been diagnosed with gender dysphoria, would they be treated differently? Would a child who has been diagnosed with gender dysphoria, and they want to transition, would they be met with intervention from this bill?
If I understand the question correctly, I don't believe there will be any difference in treatment. Yeah.
So if this bill is not about sex or gender, then what is the difference in treatment between a trans child and a child with gender dysphoria?
Well, like I said, gender dysphoria is a psychiatric diagnosis or psychological diagnosis that's treated appropriately with counseling and psychiatric medications, such as there are many times underlying psychiatric diagnoses, so mood disorders, particularly ADHD, autism spectrum, anxiety. These things are treated with anxiolytics, antidepressants, antipsychotics. The transing itself is not, or a trans child would mean, my understanding would be that they're presenting as a sex other than how they were born, which the dysphoria means there is a psychiatric diagnosis, I believe.
So how are we not gender stereotyping in this bill?
I'm sorry?
Gender stereotyping.
I'm not sure I could answer that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Is there further discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Susan Ruiz for the second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I said earlier about the conferees that came to our committee, and by far, the things that seemed to concern them the most was the surgeries. And as a previous representative who came here on the floor to talk about the bill, in favor of the bill, spoke a whole lot also about the surgeries and how, we don't want children mutilating their bodies and so forth. So we have an opportunity to make this bill about surgeries then. If that is the biggest concern, then let's change the bill so that it reflects that. I have an amendment.
The amendment appears long. Would you like to explain the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I would like to explain the amendment. What this amendment does is changes the bill and it takes out anything that does not refer to surgeries. So it's about surgery for the bill. These surgeries are not being performed in Kansas. This is why paid, people come from away from the state to talk about these surgeries, because they're not being performed in Kansas. Some surgeries are being performed on children with parental consent, with the help of the physician for other issues, not gender dysphoria and not because they're trans. There is no evidence of that. Nobody could even bring that to our committee because it doesn't happen. But this amendment makes it so that it really doesn't happen to any child under the age of 18.
Is there objection to waiving of the reading of the amendment? Seeing none, Representative, you may continue.
Again, it's very simple. You'll see on the explanation at the beginning of the bill. It inserts performing gender transition surgery on, so it's about the surgery itself. And the rest of the amendment strikes areas where it doesn't speak about surgeries. It takes out all of the social transitioning piece. So anything in the bill that pertains to physicians performing surgeries is the focus of the amendment. So that becomes the bill now. It's about making sure that children do not undergo this type of surgery under the age of 18 if they've been diagnosed with gender dysphoria or they're transitioning.
Is there any member wishing to speak to the amendment? Seeing none, Representative, you may close.
I close my amendment.
You've heard the motion by Representative Susan Ruiz to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The division has been called. The clerk will open the roll and you may vote. Seeing 15 hands, the roll call is in order. Has every member had the opportunity to vote? The clerk will close the rolls. Does any member wish to change their vote? Seeing none, with 30 voting in favor and 86 against, the motion fails. Representative Ruiz, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have another amendment.
The amendment appears short. The clerk shall read.
On page 3 in line 42 by striking if the healthcare provider, by striking all in line 43. On page 4 by striking all in lines 1 through 5. In line 6 by striking 2025.
Representative, would you like to explain your amendment?
I would. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment allows children who are currently in treatment, who've been diagnosed with gender dysphoria, transitioning, who are receiving treatment. By treatment, I don't mean surgery. I mean puberty blockers, individual therapy, any other prescribed treatment for that child that has been diagnosed with gender dysphoria or identify as trans. It grandfathers them in. On page 4, you will see that if it allows any children who are already in treatment and or they're going to start treatment, they would have to stop by 12/31/2025. This amendment strikes that out for all those kids who are currently in treatment. They will not be subjected to having to stop immediately with the amendment that was also done to the bill stating that this was going to affect in July. So they would not be subjected to that. One of the things we've not talked about is what it's like to be told after you've been on these medications or you've been undergoing therapy, you've been doing social transitioning for years, and now you're being told you can't do that anymore. And no one's talked about what the long-term effects are of getting off of those medications. We've only been focusing on, some have been focusing on long-term effects of the medication itself. We haven't talked about what happens when these kids have to come off of it very quickly. It would be much better to allow all those children who are undergoing this kind of treatment, allow them to continue indefinitely. That's why 2025 is stricken out. Any children that would start treatment prior to July 7th would not be allowed to continue. With grandfathers in the current, all the kids that are receiving the treatment now.
Does anyone wish to speak to the amendment? Seeing none, Representative, you may close.
I close my amendment.
You've heard the motion by Representative Susan Ruiz to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, nay. Nays appear to have it. The nays do have it. We're back on the bill. Is there any further discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Meyer. For the second time, I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also, thank you to all of the members of the body here today. I know that this has been a very long and drawn-out discussion and debate. I know that many of you don't really want to be here during this over the lunch hour, but for a lot of us, this is a matter of life and death. As you know, I have stood in front of this body in support of trans youth and my fellow LGBTQ community members in years past, and I have stood here today to do the same. This bill is an egregious and heartbreaking attempt to discriminate against a small but very vulnerable community in Kansas, transgender and gender nonconforming youth. We received, and I have read, well over 400 pieces of testimony in opposition to this bill from parents, children, teachers, mental health professionals, medical providers, and others on what a devastating impact this would have on the youth of Kansas. As I was reading through this testimony, several pieces stood out to me. I will not be reading directly from their testimony, but instead I will be sharing in my own words what I read. One parent said that when your child comes to you and tells you that they think they are transgender or non-binary, it is incredibly stressful as a parent. I would know. She felt like she had been punched in the stomach. She said that everything she thought she knew about her child was being turned upside down. But she also went on to say that what she did know is that she loved and believed her child and got her help and began educating themselves. She also went on to describe how they started with mental health professionals and their primary care physician, and stated that without their medical guidance and support, she was not sure her daughter would be alive today, and that we as a body, she is afraid, are about to disrupt this very essential aspect of helping transgender kids thrive and live the life they deserve. I also came across the testimony from a relative of a trans family member who stated that transgender children, like her relative and all other children, deserve to live their lives in safety, free from discrimination, prejudice, and abuse. They deserve to live their lives as their authentic selves, as the gender they truly are. She then went on to share a quote from her relative who said, "I am not trying to be a girl. I don't feel like a girl. I don't want to be a girl. I am a girl." I also read through pages and pages of testimony from educators as well, one of which stuck out from an elementary teacher in Kansas who said that her job as a teacher to 6- and 7-year-olds starts with a morning meeting where they vote on whether they would rather swim or skateboard, eat cheeseburgers or hot dogs, and where they learn a new vocabulary word to practice throughout their school day, where they go over the calendar and the weather for the day, where they talk about being kind and empathetic to our classmates if they fall down or need help. They then do handwriting, phonics, math, reading, science, social studies, and snack time. She said that in no part of their busy school day of learning do they ever discuss gender identity or sexuality, and shares that as an elementary school teacher, her school has only seen gender identity brought up one time in her career so far. She said that the child identified as a girl, so she was a girl. Her parents advocated for her, so she and her colleagues treated her like every other student at the school, with respect. The Kansas teacher went on to say that not one student ever questioned that this child was a girl, because kids are innately understanding and compassionate. And if kids can be compassionate, then we as adults can be as well. I also heard from hundreds of mental health professionals in Kansas, one of which was an LSCSW, a licensed clinical social worker, who had also shared one of my biggest concerns. As clinical social workers, we abide by a code of ethics. The bill proposed and that we are hearing today violates several of those ethics. These include our primary responsibility to promote the well-being of clients, our responsibility to respect and promote the right of clients' self-determination, that we should respect the client's right to privacy, that we should use accurate and respectful language in all communications, that we should promote the general welfare of society from local to global levels, and the development of people, their communities, and their environments. Social workers should also facilitate informed participation in shaping public policy and social policies and institutions. We should also engage in social and political action that seeks to ensure that people have equal access to the resources, employment, services, and opportunities they require to meet their basic needs. Social workers are also to act to expand choice and opportunity for all people, with special regard to the vulnerable, disadvantaged, oppressed, marginalized, and exploited people and groups. If this bill passes, social workers and mental health professionals, such as myself and the hundreds who submitted testimony, will not be able to ethically abide by our code of ethics, and will either have to choose between breaking the code, which will cause us to lose the trust of our clients, or lose our job and livelihood. But lastly, a message from a Kansas minister hit me particularly hard. This minister said that they have often had the duty of sitting with struggling and hurting trans youth. She described how, as a pastor, she has seen firsthand what the impact this legislation has had on transgender Kansans. She described how in previous times that bills of this nature have been discussed, that she has found herself in the emergency rooms with teens and adults who have attempted suicide because they believe and fear that there is no hope for their future. She went on to say that she has strongly held religious and ethical beliefs that they, along with all other Kansans, are beloved children of God, created in the divine image of love, and that they have a right to pursue happiness and make a contribution to their communities. Again, these are just a few of the testimonies that stood out to me as I spent the last few days pouring through heartfelt pleas to just listen to their fears, their hopes, their dreams, their wishes, and just be allowed to live as their authentic selves. For their children and loved ones to be free from discrimination, hatred, and misunderstanding. For all Kansans to be accepted for who they are and how they were born. It is not our job as legislators to get involved in the private, complex, heart-wrenching, and vital medical and mental health decisions that parents and caregivers make in consultation with their providers. Gender-affirming care is not child abuse. I know this because I am a mandated reporter, and I work with families in the therapeutic setting on a regular basis. There is no evidence suggesting that Kansas physicians perform gender transition surgery on minors, but we are willing to let you have a straight surgery ban in order to compromise with those who believe the rhetoric spread by groups with no real understanding of the practice of gender-affirming care in the state of Kansas. We tried and tried again today to find a compromise so that we can respect and protect the families and the children who this will affect, yet we have been shot down at every attempt. This bill is wrong. It is overly broad, misguided, and will cause grave harm not only to our diverse community of gender nonconforming and trans youth, but also put our medical and mental health professionals who will be at risk of civil liability and loss of licensure at an even greater risk. So please, listen to the stories that I have shared and the pleas of hundreds of Kansas families, children, medical and mental health providers, teachers, and clergy, and put a stop to this madness. And to those families, children, and transgender and non-gender conforming folks listening today, I hear you. I love you. I will support you, and I will stand up for you no matter what. You are valid. You are seen. You are worthy, and you deserve to live a life free from discrimination. But short of that, I want you to stay with us and don't give in to thoughts of self-harm or defeat. We will keep fighting to change these laws so that you can live your lives as your authentic selves because you deserve it and you are loved. Trans rights are human rights, so please stay strong because we will not give up on you. Vote no on SB 63. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Representative Bryce, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to say thanks for everyone who's been here. It's been a fantastic tone for this debate, I think, and the decorum's been maintained. I'm very grateful that we've had this discussion today. And with that, Mr. Chair, I move that when the committee rises and reports a report SB 63 favorably for passage.
You've heard the motion by Representative Bryce to report SB 63 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, nay. Ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. This concludes our general orders. The chair recognizes the majority leader.
Mr. Chair, I move we rise and report.
You have heard the motion to rise and report. All in favor, say aye. Opposed, no. The motion passes.
The clerk will read the committee report.
Mr. Speaker, your committee of the whole recommends that SB 63 be passed.
Speaker recognizes Representative Proctor to adopt the committee of the whole report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the adoption of the committee report.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor, heard the motion to adopt the committee report. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee report is adopted. Reports of standing committees. The clerk will read.
The Committee on Health and Human Services recommends HB 2071 be amended, be passed as amended. The Committee on Insurance recommends HB 2043 be amended and the bill be passed as amended. The Committee on Taxation recommends HB 2011 be amended and bill be passed as amended. The Committee on Insurance recommends HB 2048 be passed, and because the committee is of the opinion that the bill is of a non-controversial nature, be placed on the consent calendar. The Committee on Insurance recommends HB 2049 be amended, and the bill be passed as amended. The Committee on Insurance recommends HB 2050 be amended, and the bill be passed as amended. Committee on Insurance recommends HB 2042 be amended and the bill be amended as amended. Be passed as amended, sorry. The Committee on Elections recommends HCR 5004 be amended and the resolution be adopted as amended.
Is there any objection to returning to that order of business, introduction of bills and concurrent resolutions? Seeing no objection, the clerk will read.
HB 2161 by Committee on Taxation, requested by Gary Reeser on behalf of Kansas Soybean Association, an act concerning taxation. HB 2162 by Committee on Taxation, requested by Scott Schneider on behalf of Associated General Contractors of Kansas, an act concerning sales taxation. HB 2163 by Committee on Taxation, requested by Representative Howerton on behalf of Leading Age Kansas, an act concerning income taxation. HB 2164 by Committee on Corrections and Juvenile Justice, requested by Whitney Dameron on behalf of the City of Topeka, an act concerning the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Act. HB 2165 by Representative Riley, an act enacting the returning to non-accountability of the executive branch agencies that report to the Governor Act. HB 2166 by Committee on Judiciary, requested by Representative Humphreys on behalf of the Office of Revisor of Statutes pursuant to KSA 45-229, an act concerning the Open Records Act. House Bill number 2167 by Committee on Federal and State Affairs, requested by Representative Meyer, an act concerning firearms. HB 2168 by Committee on Transportation, requested by Zach Denny on behalf of the Department of Revenue, an act concerning motor vehicles. HB 2169 by Committee on Transportation, requested by Zach Denny on behalf of the Department of Revenue, an act concerning motor vehicles. HB 2170 by Committee on Health and Human Services, requested by Representative Essex, an act concerning days of commemoration. HB 2171 by Representatives Potter Marshall, Fairchild, and others, an act concerning abortion. HB 2172 by Committee on Agricultural and Natural Resources, requested by Representative Rajes, an act concerning water. HB 2173 by Committee on Judiciary, requested by Representative Schreiber, an act concerning the Kansas Offender Registration Act. HB 2174 by Committee on Agricultural and Natural Resources, requested by Representative Rajes, an act concerning attorneys at law. HB 2175 by Committee on Child Welfare and Foster Care, requested by Representative Howerton, an act concerning children and minors relating to the revised Revised Kansas Code for Care of Children. HB 2176 by Representative Potter Marshall, an act concerning education. HB 2177 by Committee on Corrections and Juvenile Justice, requested by Representative Barrett, an act concerning motor vehicles. HB 2178 by Committee on Corrections and Juvenile Justice, requested by Brenna Bikoski on behalf of Kansas Appleseed, an act concerning social welfare. HB 2179 by Committee on Corrections and Juvenile Justice, requested by Brenna Bikoski on behalf of Kansas Appleseed, an act concerning children and minors. HB 2180 by Committee on Energy, Utilities, and Telecommunications, requested by Representative McDonald on behalf of Representative Ohibison, an act concerning disability services. HB 2181 by Committee on Corrections and Juvenile Justice, requested by Joe Molina on behalf of the Kansas Bar Association, an act concerning family law. HB 2182 by Committee on Judiciary, requested by Meredith Fry on behalf of the Kansas Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence, an act concerning protection orders. HB 2183 by Committee on Judiciary, requested by Representative Barrett, an act concerning crimes, punishment, and criminal procedure.
Are there announcements? Speaker recognizes Representative Roth. Hold on. We're going to back up. We have one more piece of business. House Bill 2012 is withdrawn from the Committee on Taxation and referred to the Committee on Agriculture and Natural Resources. Now the Speaker recognizes Representative Roth.
Greetings, everyone. I'd just like to announce that in the event that the House is not on the floor at noon tomorrow, we will be having a hymn sing tomorrow from noon to 1. And so we'd like to invite everyone, especially those that like to, do scriptures and God and believes in God, to come and do a hymn sing with us if we're not in chamber tomorrow noon to 1. Thank you very much.
Speaker recognizes Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The House Higher Education Budget Committee will meet today at 2:20 to work the budget recommendations for K-State University. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker recognizes Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Attention commerce fans, we're still meeting today at 2:20 and we have one bill hearing. Thank you.
Speaker recognizes Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Health Committee will convene in 5 minutes at the usual room. Thank you.
Speaker recognizes Representative Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Education, we will meet as quickly as possible. We have people who've driven in from out of town to visit with us today, so let's hustle up if we can.
Speaker recognizes Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Joint Committee on State Building Construction will be meeting Monday, February 3rd at 12 noon in a different room, 142 South, 142 South.
Speaker recognizes Representative Mosier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Agricultural and Natural Resources Budget will meet immediately following adjournment here. So we'll see you in 118 North. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker recognizes Representative Lewis.
Corrections and Juvenile Justice will meet as soon as we can in the regular room. Thank you.
Speaker recognizes Representative Avercamp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Welfare Reform will start the meeting at 2:20. So 2:20 Welfare Reform. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Are there any further announcements? Seeing none, Speaker recognizes the Majority Leader for a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House adjourn until Friday, January 31st, 11 a.m.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no.